I am 102 years old. When you reach this age, the world becomes very quiet. Not because the world has stopped talking, but because almost everyone you once loved has already finished their conversation. My friends are gone. My brothers are gone. Even the woman I spent 63 years loving left this world 15 winters ago. Now it's mostly just me, a wooden chair by the window, and a long road of memories stretching behind my eyes. And when you sit long enough with memories, something strange begins to happen. You start noticing patterns. You start seeing the same mistakes repeated again and again by millions of people who believe they are living wisely, but they aren't. They're wasting their lives. Not in obvious ways. Most people don't ruin their lives with crime or disaster. No, the real tragedy is quieter than that. They waste their lives on something they believe is important, something society praises, something everyone around them is chasing, and only when they are very old, very tired, and very alone do they realize the terrible truth. They spent their entire life chasing the wrong thing. I know this because I almost did the same. But one moment, one small moment when I was a young man, changed everything. That moment taught me the first lesson that saved my life. And today, if you'll listen closely, it might save yours too. The world I grew up in. I was born in 1924. No smartphones, no internet, no glowing screens telling you what to think. Just dirt roads, coal stoves, and people who work with their hands. My father was a railway mechanic. Strong man, silent man, the kind of man who believed words were expensive and should be used carefully. Every morning before sunrise, he would drink black coffee from the same tin mug. Then he would lace his boots, grab his lunch pail, and walk 3 miles to the rail yard. Rain, snow, didn't matter. He walked. When I was a boy, I asked him once, "Why don't you ever complain about work?" He looked at me like I had asked the strangest question in the world. Then he said something I didn't understand until many decades later. He said, "Son, work isn't the problem. Forgetting why you work, that's the problem." At the time, I didn't understand a word of it. I just nodded like boys do. But that sentence would come back to me many times in my life, especially on the day I nearly ruined everything. When I was 19. I was 19 years old in 1943. 19 is a dangerous age. At 19, you believe time is endless. You believe life is waiting patiently for you. You believe you can waste a few years and nothing important will be lost. But time is not patient. It is a quiet thief, and it steals while you are busy looking somewhere else. At 19, I had one dream. Money, not just enough money to survive. I wanted a lot, more than my father, more than anyone in my town. I wanted a big house, nice clothes, respect. You see, when you grow up poor, you develop a strange relationship with money. You think money will erase the embarrassment. You think money will prove you are worth something. And I believe that lie with all my heart. So when an opportunity came to move to the city for a job at a manufacturing plant, I took it without hesitation. I left my small town, left my mother's cooking, left the creaky house I grew up in, and most importantly, I left the people who loved me. At the time, it felt like victory. But looking back now, that was the moment the wrong path began. The city was loud. Steel factories, trains screaming across tracks, men rushing everywhere with briefcases and tired faces. Everyone looked busy, important, successful, and I wanted to look just like them. So I worked 12 hours a day, sometimes 14. I volunteered for extra shifts, overtime, night work, anything that paid more. My boss loved me, said I had ambition, said I would go far. And those words felt like gasoline poured onto a young man's ego. Every dollar I earned made me hungrier, not satisfied. Hungrier. That's something nobody tells you about chasing money. The more you get, the more you feel you need. Like drinking salt water. The letter. About 6 months after moving to the city, I received a letter. My mother had beautiful handwriting. Neat, careful, the kind of handwriting that tells you someone took their time. Inside the envelope was a simple message. Your father hasn't been feeling well. If you have time, It would mean a lot if you visited. That was it. No guilt, no pressure, just a quiet invitation. But I didn't go. I told myself I was too busy. I told myself I would visit next month, after I saved a little more money, after things slowed down at work, after I got ahead. Next month, next month, next month. 3 weeks later, another letter came. This one was written by my mother's neighbor. It said my father had died. Heart failure. Collapse in the rail yard. Just like that. A man who had worked 40 years without complaint. Gone in a single afternoon. I remember sitting on the edge of my bed with that letter shaking in my hands. The room felt suddenly very small, very quiet. And one thought kept repeating in my mind. I didn't go see him. Not because I couldn't. Because I chose not to. I had traded time with my father for overtime at a factory. And suddenly all that extra money felt like dirt in my pockets. The train ride home. I took the night train back to my hometown. The same tracks my father had spent his life repairing. I watched the darkness pass outside the window. And for the first time in my young life, I felt something heavy settle in my chest. Regret, not the small kind. The kind that digs deep and stays there forever. When I arrived, the house looked smaller than I remembered. My mother hugged me at the door. She didn't say anything for a long time, just held me. Then she whispered something that shattered me. He asked about you the morning he died. That sentence has lived with me for 83 years. Because I knew what she didn't say. He waited for me, and I never came. The funeral. At the funeral, I stood beside the wooden coffin and stared at my father's hands. Rough hands, scarred from tools and metal. Hands that had fixed broken things his entire life. And in that moment, something inside me broke. I realized something that most young people don't understand yet. Life is not measured in years. It's measured in moments you didn't think were important at the time. A dinner you skipped, a phone call you delayed, a visit you postponed. Those moments look small until they disappear forever. Standing there beside my father's coffin, I made a promise to myself. A promise that shaped the rest of my life. The first lesson. Here is the first lesson I learned. And I wish someone had carved it into my skull when I was young. Most people waste their life trading the things that matter most for things that matter least. They trade time with family for money they don't actually need. They trade friendships for status. They trade health for success that nobody remembers after they die. And by the time they realize a mistake, time is already gone. Listen carefully to an old man when I say this. Money returns. Opportunities return. Even love sometimes returns. But time never does. Not 1 second. Not one breath. Once it's spent, it's gone forever. And the greatest tragedy of my generation, and your generation, is that people behave as if time is unlimited. It isn't. My father understood that. That's why he said, work isn't the problem. Forgetting why you work, that's the problem. He worked for family, for stability, for love. But I had started working for ego, for pride, for an imaginary finish line that keeps moving farther away. And that realization changed everything. What I did next, after the funeral, I stayed in my hometown for 2 weeks. No factories, no overtime, just quiet mornings sitting on the porch with my mother. We drank tea, watched birds, talked about simple things. And slowly, something strange happened. For the first time since moving to the city, I felt peaceful, not successful, not impressive. Peaceful. That's when I realized another truth nobody talks about. The things that give life meaning are usually the things that don't cost money. A conversation, a laugh, a shared meal, a walk beside someone you love. These moments look small while they're happening. But when you're 102 years old, they are the only moments you remember clearly. Everything else fades. A question for you. So let me ask you something. Right now, who in your life is waiting for you? A parent? A friend? A partner? A child? And how many times have you told yourself, I'll spend time with them later? Later is the most dangerous word in the human language. Because later is where dreams go to die. Later is where relationships slowly disappear. Later is where regret is born. If you learn nothing else from my 102 years on this earth, learn this. Do not postpone love, the lesson that saved my life. When I returned to the city after my father's funeral, I made a decision that confused many people. I stopped chasing overtime, stopped working every weekend, stopped sacrificing every moment of life for money. My boss thought I had lost ambition. My co-workers thought I was making a mistake. Maybe they were right in their own way, because I didn't become the richest man in the room. But something else happened. I became the happiest. And that happiness would lead me to the most important people and moments of my life, including the woman I would eventually marry. But that story and the next lesson I learned about life is something I discovered in a small cafe on a rainy afternoon in 1951. And that lesson might be even more important than the first, because it reveals another way people unknowingly waste their entire life, where the first lesson led me. When I returned to the city after my father's funeral, I was not the same young man who had left it. Before that train ride home, I believed life was a race. Everyone running, everyone pushing, everyone trying to get ahead. But now, something felt different. I still worked. I still cared about doing a good job. But I stopped treating every moment like a transaction. I began noticing people again. The old man who swept the factory floor every morning. The woman who ran the small bakery across the street. The mechanic who whistled old songs while repairing trucks. Before, they had all been invisible to me. But now I realized something strange. The happiest people around me were not the richest. They were not the most successful. In fact, most of them had very ordinary lives. But they had something rare. They were present, fully present in their days. I didn't know it yet, but that realization was leading me toward the second great lesson of my life. And it arrived on a rainy afternoon in 1951. The rainy afternoon. It was a Tuesday. I remember because Tuesdays were the slowest days of the factory. The sky had been gray since morning, and by noon the rain began falling hard enough to turn the streets into mirrors. The lunch whistle blew. Most of the men ran to the diner across the street. But that day I felt like walking. So I pulled my coat tight and wandered down 2 blocks until I saw a small cafe I had never noticed before. Tiny place. Foggy windows. Warm yellow light spilling onto the wet sidewalk. I pushed open the door. A bell rang softly above my head. Inside were only 3 people. A young waitress wiping a table. An old man reading a newspaper. And a woman sitting alone near the window with a cup of coffee. She looked up for just a second. And then she smiled. Not a polite smile. A real one. The kind that reaches the eyes. I nodded and sat 2 tables away. Ordered coffee. Nothing fancy. Just coffee and a quiet place to sit while the rain fell. But sometimes the smallest moments become the turning points of an entire life. Her name was Eliza. After a few minutes, the woman near the window stood up to leave. As she passed my table, she paused. "You look like someone thinking very hard," she said. Her voice was calm. Curious. I chuckled. Just tired from work. She tilted her head slightly. "You don't look tired," she said. "You look lost." That surprised me. Not because she was wrong, but because no one had ever said that to me before. We started talking. Simple conversation. About the rain. About the city. About work. Her name was Eliza. She was a school teacher, taught literature to children. But the thing I noticed most about her wasn't what she said. It was how she listened. Fully, carefully, like every word mattered. In those days, people didn't rush conversations the way they do now. Phones weren't buzzing. Notifications weren't interrupting every thought. So we talked for nearly an hour. Just 2 strangers sharing stories while rain tapped against the windows. And before she left, she asked me a question that changed the direction of my life. The question, she asked, "Are you happy?" Now that may sound like a simple question, but when you're 27 years old and someone asks you something honest, it can feel like a mirror suddenly appearing in front of your soul. I opened my mouth to say yes, because that's what people are supposed to say. But the word didn't come out. Instead, I hesitated. And that hesitation answered the question for me. Eliza didn't say anything for a moment. She just watched the rain. Then she said something I have remembered for 75 years. She said, "Most people spend their lives trying to build a life they never actually stop to live." At the time I laughed. I thought she was being poetic. But the older I became, the more I realized she was telling the truth. A dangerous truth. The second lesson begins. You see, there's another way people waste their entire life. And it's more common than you think. They're always preparing for life, but never living it. They work for the weekend. Then when the weekend comes, they worry about Monday. They work for retirement. Then when retirement arrives, their health is gone. They postpone joy, postpone rest, postpone love, always saying the same sentence. I'll enjoy life later. But later becomes next year. Next year becomes someday. And someday quietly becomes never. I didn't realize it yet, but I was dangerously close to living exactly that kind of life. Eliza saw it immediately. Sometimes strangers can see us more clearly than we see ourselves. The walk. After the rain slowed, we left the cafe together. The streets were shining under the streetlights. Puddles everywhere. We walked slowly, talking about books, about childhood memories, about the strange ways life unfolds. Eventually we reached a small park, wooden benches, tall trees dripping with rain. We sat down, and Eliza asked me something else. "Tell me what you're working so hard for." I answered immediately. Security. That was the word everyone used back then. Security. Money. Savings. A safe future. She nodded thoughtfully. Then she asked a question that exposed a flaw in my thinking. "And when you finally have enough security, what will you do?" I paused. I hadn't actually thought about that, so I said something vague. "Relax, I suppose." She smiled gently. But why not relax sometimes now? I remember staring at her like she had suggested something ridiculous. Relax now? When there was money to earn, opportunities to chase? That idea felt irresponsible, almost dangerous. But then she said something so simple, it completely dismantled my logic. She said, "You're acting like life is a dress rehearsal. The truth about life. Let me tell you something from a man who has lived more than a century. Life is not a rehearsal. There is no practice round, no second version where you do things better. This is it. The conversation you didn't have, the trip you postponed, the friend you forgot to call. Those moments don't rewind. And the strange thing about time is, when you're young, you believe there will always be another opportunity. But when you're old, you realize most opportunities only come once. What Eliza taught me. Over the next few months, Eliza and I kept meeting. Sometimes for coffee, sometimes for walks, sometimes just to sit quietly and watch the world move around us. She had a way of asking questions that made me see my own life differently. One evening, she said, "You know what the saddest thing I see as a teacher?" I shook my head. She said, "Children are naturally curious about life, but adults slowly teach them to postpone living." I asked what she meant. She explained it like this. When children are small, they are fascinated by everything. Clouds, ants, stories, music. They experience life fully. But as they grow older, they begin hearing the same message again and again. Study now, work now, sacrifice now, so that someday you can enjoy life. But that someday keeps moving further away until decades pass, and they suddenly realize they forgot how to enjoy the present moment. The second lesson. So here's the second lesson I learned. And if you understand this early in life, you will avoid one of the greatest regrets of old age. Most people waste their life preparing to live, instead of living while they prepare. They believe joy must be earned through exhaustion. They believe rest must wait until success arrives. They believe happiness belongs in the future. But happiness is not a destination. It is something you practice along the way. You don't wait 30 years to start enjoying your life. You learn to enjoy the ordinary days as they happen. A cup of coffee, a walk at sunset, a conversation with someone who matters. These moments are not distractions from life. They are life. The warning. Now I want to tell you something that may sound harsh, but it's the truth. Modern society has become addicted to busyness. Everyone is rushing, multitasking, chasing productivity. But very few people stop and ask themselves a simple question: what am I rushing toward? Because if you rush your entire life, you will also rush past the things that give life meaning. Families grow older while you're busy. Children grow up while you're working late. Friendships fade because nobody had time to call. And then one day you wake up and realize something terrifying. You build a successful life, but you never actually experienced it. That realization is one of the most painful awakenings a human being can have. I have seen it happen to many people. Men who spent 40 years chasing promotions, only to retire into loneliness. People who sacrificed relationships for status, and discovered status cannot hug you when you're old. A moment I will never forget. One evening in 1953, Eliza and I were sitting by the river. The sun was setting, orange light on the water, boats drifting slowly. She turned to me and said, "If you live to be a very old man, what do you think you'll regret more?" I asked what she meant. She said, "Working too little or loving too little?" I didn't answer right away, because deep down I already knew the truth. No one on their deathbed says, "I wish I had spent more time at the office." But millions of people whisper a different sentence: "I wish I had spent more time with the people I loved." That realization stayed with me, and it shaped every decision I made afterward. What happened next? About a year after that rainy afternoon, I asked Eliza to marry me, not because life was perfect, not because we were wealthy, but because I had learned something important. The best moments of life are not postponed achievements. They are shared experiences, and I wanted to share as many as possible with her. We married in a small church. No fancy decorations, just family, friends, and a simple promise. And the life we built together would teach me the next lesson, a lesson about fear. Because fear is another thing that quietly steals entire lifetimes from people. But that story begins with a decision I almost didn't make, a risk that terrified me, and a mistake that nearly cost us everything. And it led to the third lesson of my life, one that most people learn far too late: the beginning of a new life. Eliza and I married in the spring of 1954. It was a simple ceremony, a small church, wooden pews polished by decades of hands, sunlight slipping through stained glass windows, and painting quiet colors across the floor. There were no expensive decorations, no photographers running around, just family, a few friends, and the quiet promise two people make when they decide to walk through life together. I remember looking at Eliza's face that day and realizing something strange. For the first time in my life, I wasn't thinking about the future. I wasn't worrying about money or success or reputation. I was simply present in the moment. And that feeling, that quiet sense of being exactly where you're supposed to be, is rarer than people realize. Because most people spend their wedding day worrying about everything except the moment itself. But Eliza had already taught me something important. The present moment is the only place life actually exists, not in yesterday, not in tomorrow, only here, the small apartment. We moved into a tiny apartment above a grocery store, 1 bedroom, thin walls, and a kitchen so small that if both of you had stood inside at the same time, someone had to move. But those early years were some of the happiest of my life. Not because we had money. We didn't. Not because everything was easy. It wasn't. But because we were building something together. Cooking dinner while music played on the radio. Reading books late into the night. Taking long walks through the city on Sunday mornings when the streets were quiet. Those moments didn't look important at the time. But when I look back now from the age of 102, those are the memories that shine the brightest. Not promotions, not paychecks, just ordinary evenings with the person you love. The decision that terrified me. 2 years into our marriage, something unexpected happened. The factory where I worked announced layoffs. Production was slowing. Machines were replacing workers. And suddenly, the job I had relied on for nearly a decade was no longer secure. Most of the men panicked. Some started fighting for promotions. Others worked longer hours, hoping to look more valuable. Fear spread through the building like smoke. Fear does something strange to people. It makes them cling tighter to things that may already be slipping away. But Eliza saw something different. One evening while we were eating dinner, she said, "You've never really loved that job, have you?" I shrugged. "It pays the bills." She smiled gently. "That's not the same thing." Then she asked a question that made my stomach tighten. "If you could do any work in the world, what would it be?" No one had ever asked me that before. Not seriously. When you grow up poor, you don't spend much time thinking about dreams. You think about survival. But that night, I admitted something I had never said out loud. I always wanted to build things. I said, real things. Furniture, tables, chairs, something people actually keep in their homes. My grandfather had been a carpenter. When I was a child, I used to sit in his workshop watching wood shavings fall like curled ribbons onto the floor. The smell of fresh-cut oak, the quiet rhythm of tools against wood. But somewhere along the way, that dream had been buried under practicality. Bills, responsibility, security. Eliza listened carefully. Then she said something that frightened me. "You should try." The fear. Now listen carefully to what I'm about to tell you, because this is where most people quietly abandon their dreams. Fear, not dramatic fear, not the kind you see in movies. The quiet fear that whispers practical questions. What if you fail? What if you lose money? What if people think you're foolish? What if you embarrass yourself? These fears sound reasonable, responsible, but they have destroyed more dreams than poverty ever could. I remember sitting at our kitchen table that night, doing calculations. Savings, rent, groceries. Every number pointed to the same conclusion. Starting a small carpentry shop was risky, very risky. The logical choice was obvious. Stay at the factory. Play it safe. But Eliza said something that changed how I looked at the entire decision. She said, "Fear doesn't mean something is wrong. Sometimes it just means something matters." The third lesson begins. A few weeks later, I did something that shocked many people. I left the factory. No guarantees. No steady paycheck. Just a small rented workshop, a handful of tools, and a deep knot of fear in my stomach. The first few months were difficult. Customers were rare. Money was tight. There were nights when I lay awake staring at the ceiling wondering if I had made a terrible mistake. But something else was happening too. For the first time in my life, I woke up excited to begin the day. I was building things with my hands. Tables, shelves, rocking chairs, each piece unique. Each piece carrying a small part of my attention and care. Work no longer felt like something I was escaping from. It felt meaningful. And that leads me to the third lesson that most people learn far too late. The third lesson. Most people waste their entire life, not because they lack opportunity, but because they are afraid to take meaningful risks. They choose safety over fulfillment, predictability over purpose, comfort over possibility. Now understand something important. I am not telling you to be reckless. Responsibility matters. But there's a difference between responsible caution and living your entire life inside a cage built from fear. Too many people spend decades doing work that slowly drains their spirit, not because they have no alternative, but because they're afraid to try, afraid to fail, afraid to start again. And fear becomes a prison with invisible walls. What failure really looks like. People imagine failure as some catastrophic event, losing everything, being humiliated, starting over with nothing. But in my 100 years of life, I have learned something surprising. The real failure most people experience is quieter than that. The real failure is never trying, never discovering what you might have become, never testing the edges of your own courage. That kind of failure doesn't make headlines, but it leaves a permanent question in the back of your mind. What if I had tried? And that question can haunt a person for decades. The shop, my little carpentry shop, slowly grew. At first, I built simple furniture, kitchen tables, bookshelves, chairs. Then people began requesting custom pieces. A cradle for a newborn baby, a dining table for a large family, a rocking chair for an elderly woman who wanted something comfortable to sit in during the evenings. Every piece carried a story, and every time I delivered one, I saw something that made me proud. People touched the wood, ran their fingers across the surface, smiled. That kind of satisfaction is difficult to describe because it doesn't come from money. It comes from meaning, from knowing your work contributes something real to another person's life. The bitter truth about success. Now I want to tell you something society rarely admits. Success, as most people define it, is often empty. Status, luxury, recognition. These things can feel exciting at first, but they are terrible foundations for a meaningful life because they depend on other people's opinions, and opinions change quickly. Meaningful work, on the other hand, creates something deeper. It creates pride, purpose, a sense that your time on this earth contributed something worthwhile. I have met wealthy people who were miserable, and I have met humble craftsmen who radiated quiet satisfaction. The difference wasn't money. It was alignment. They were living in a way that matched who they truly were. A night I will never forget. About 8 years after opening the shop, something happened that confirmed everything Eliza had told me. One evening I was finishing a rocking chair. The shop smelled of cedar. The radio was playing softly in the background. Eliza walked in carrying 2 cups of tea. She looked around the workshop and smiled. "You know," she said, "you seem lighter these days." I asked what she meant. She thought for a moment. "Before, when you worked at the factory, you carried the weight of something unfinished. And now," she looked at the chair I had just built, "now it feels like you're finally living your own life." That sentence stayed with me, because many people reach the end of their lives having never truly lived their own life. They lived the life their parents expected, the life society encouraged, the life that looked impressive from the outside. But deep inside, it never felt like theirs. The warning about fear. Let me give you a warning. Fear will always sound intelligent. It will always present logical arguments. It will tell you that waiting is wise, that staying comfortable is responsible. But fear rarely tells you the full story. It never tells you about the quiet joy waiting on the other side of courage, the satisfaction of discovering what you're capable of, the pride of building something meaningful. Those rewards only appear after you move through the fear, not before. Years passing. The years moved quickly after that. Eliza continued teaching. My carpentry business grew slowly but steadily. We bought a small house, planted a garden, filled our life with simple routines and shared laughter. From the outside, it probably looked like an ordinary life, but ordinary lives often contain the most extraordinary meaning. Still, there was one lesson left for me to learn, a lesson that arrived much later, a lesson about something even more dangerous than fear, because fear at least warns you. This next mistake is far more subtle. Most people never even realize they are making it until their life is almost over. And it has to do with something nearly everyone believes they have plenty of: time. The final lesson arrives quietly. Life has a strange way of moving faster the longer you live. When you're a child, a single summer feels endless. When you're 20, 10 years sounds like a lifetime. But somewhere around middle age, time begins to accelerate. Years start passing the way seasons once did. Blink, and another decade is gone. Eliza and I lived many quiet, beautiful years together. We planted apple trees in the yard, raised 2 children, built routines that slowly became the rhythm of our life. Sunday mornings meant pancakes and laughter in the kitchen. Summer evenings meant sitting on the porch while fireflies blinked across the garden. Autumn meant the smell with smoke and fallen leaves. And winter meant warm blankets, books, and the sound of wind against the windows. At the time, these moments felt ordinary. But ordinary moments are the real treasure of a long life. You just don't realize it while you're living them. The day everything changed. Eliza was 71 when the doctor found the illness. It started with fatigue, then headaches, then the quiet concern in the doctor's voice when he asked us to come back for more tests. I remember sitting in the hospital room when the diagnosis finally arrived. Cancer, aggressive, unpredictable. Suddenly the future we had assumed would continue quietly looked fragile. And that's when I learned the final lesson life had been preparing me for. The 4th lesson. Most people waste their life because they believe time is guaranteed. They treat tomorrow like a promise. They assume the people they love will always be there. They postpone kindness, postpone forgiveness, postpone gratitude, because they believe there will always be another chance. But time does not make promises. Time simply moves forward, quietly, relentlessly, and one day it runs out. Our final years together, after the diagnosis, Eliza and I made a decision. We stopped postponing things, not dramatic things, simple things. We took more walks, watched more sunsets, visited places we had always said we would see someday. Sometimes it was just driving to the countryside with sandwiches and tea. Other times it was sitting quietly together without saying anything at all. When you truly understand that time is limited, your priorities become very clear. Small irritations disappear. Arguments lose their importance. You stop wasting energy on things that don't matter, and you start paying attention to the people sitting right beside you. A conversation I will never forget. One evening about a year before she passed, we were sitting on the porch watching the sky turn orange. Eliza reached over and held my hand. Then she asked a question. "Are you afraid?" I thought about it for a moment, and then I answered honestly. Yes, not of being alone, not even of death, but of something else. I'm afraid I didn't appreciate enough of the time we had. She squeezed my hand and smiled. "You did better than most people," she said. "Most people never even realize time is precious until it's almost gone." Then she said something that still echoes in my mind. "Don't waste the years you have left worrying about the years that pass." That sentence carried more wisdom than many books I've read. The day she left, Eliza passed away quietly on a cold winter morning. Snow was falling outside the window. The world looked soft and silent. I held her hand as her breathing slowed. And when she was gone, the house felt impossibly quiet. People often ask me what grief feels like. It feels like someone removed a piece of your world. Everything still exists, but it doesn't feel complete anymore. For a long time after she died, I sat alone on the porch in the evenings, watching sunsets we used to watch together, remembering conversations, laughter, ordinary days that now felt priceless. What old age teaches you. When you reach 100 years old, something strange happens. Your memories become clearer than the present. I can still hear my father's boots on the wooden floor, still see Eliza smiling across a cafe table on that rainy afternoon. Still feel the warmth of my children sleeping against my shoulder when they were small. But you know what memories never return? The days I spent worrying about money. The hours I spent chasing things that didn't matter. The arguments that felt important at the time. Those moments disappear completely because they never truly mattered. The bitter truth. Now I want to tell you the bitter truth that most people never hear until it's too late. Society encourages you to waste your life. It tells you success means working endlessly. It tells you happiness comes after achievement. It tells you rest must be earned through exhaustion. But that story is backwards. Work is part life. Success can be satisfying. But neither of those things should replace the experience of living. The danger is not working hard. The danger is forgetting why you're working at all. If your work destroys your relationships, steals your health, and removes your ability to enjoy ordinary days, then you are paying far too high a price. Because one day you will look back and realize something painful. You were so busy building a life, you forgot to live it. The question everyone must ask. So let me ask you a question. Right now, at this moment in your life, are you living, or are you only preparing to live? Are you chasing things that truly matter, or things that only look impressive from the outside? Are you spending time with the people you love, or telling yourself you will do that later? Because later is not guaranteed. I have lived 102 years, and if there is one thing I know with absolute certainty, it is this. The most valuable currency in the universe is time shared with people you love. Everything else is secondary. The 4 lessons of a long life. If I could sit across from my younger self today, I would give him 4 simple reminders. First, do not trade the people you love for money or status. Time with them is the real wealth. Second, do not postpone joy waiting for the perfect moment. Life is happening right now. Third, Do not let fear stop you from building a life that feels meaningful. Courage creates possibilities comfort never will. Fourth, never assume you have unlimited time. Express love often. Forgive quickly. Be present while the moment is still here. What matters at the end? At 102 years old, I own very little. The house is quiet. The workshop closed many years ago. Most of the people who once filled my life have already finished their journey. But I am not sad, because the life I lived was full of laughter, full of shared meals, full of small, ordinary moments that turned out to be extraordinary memories. That is what remains when everything else fades. Not wealth, not reputation, just memories of love, time, and connection. A final message for you. If you are watching this today, you still have something incredibly valuable. Time, maybe a lot, maybe less than you think, but enough to make better choices. Call your parents. Spend time with your children. Tell someone you love them. Take the trip. Start the project. Sit quietly with someone and actually listen. These small decisions shape the quality of an entire life. Soft call to action. If this old man's story meant something to you, take a moment today to do one thing differently. One small action that brings you closer to the people and experiences that truly matter. And if you want more stories and lessons from a lifetime of experience, stay with this channel. Because sometimes the wisdom we need most comes from people who have already walked the entire road.